Some people say you can trace the moment your life changed by a single breath. Mine was held just as my wife stepped onto the stage with her boss. We were supposed to be celebrating 10 years of marriage. 10 years of building a life together. Friends, colleagues, even her parents were gathered in the soft-lit ballroom we'd rented for the occasion. I planned to give a short speech after dinner, something light, grateful, maybe a little romantic. But I never got the chance. Lorraine got there first. She wasn't supposed to be on stage at all. When she took the microphone, I thought maybe she wanted to thank me. Or surprise me with something sentimental, an old video, a shared memory. I even smiled as she motioned for silence. What followed was not a thank you. It was an announcement. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight, she began, and something about her tone made my stomach tighten. Tonight is about new beginnings for me. After 10 years with Caleb, I've realized that I need something more, something deeper. So this is also a farewell. I didn't understand at first. It was as if the language she spoke was suddenly foreign to me. She continued, I've decided to leave this marriage. I've found someone who sees me. Who wants what I want. Who is strong enough to give it to me. Then she turned and gestured to Gregory, her boss, who I hadn't even noticed standing behind her. I'm choosing Gregory, she said. Because I want a family. And Caleb can't give that to me. The words hit like thunderclaps in a silent field. The room froze. Dozens of eyes turned toward me. I felt my hands go cold, my heart seize. My breath came slow and shallow. I couldn't even move. My mind had broken into two parts, the part that couldn't believe this was real, and the part that suddenly understood everything all too clearly. What she had done wasn't just betrayal, it was performance. And I was the unwitting audience. I could barely hear the gasps, the whispers. But I saw her father rise to his feet. This is disgraceful, he said sharply, eyes locked on her. What you've done here is beyond unacceptable, Lorraine. Her mother added, you could have ended this in private. You could have spared Caleb this humiliation. Then came the sentence that would echo long after the party ended, we don't support this. We don't support you. They left. All of them. Her parents, her two brothers, even her aunt who'd flown in from Vermont. They walked out past the stunned guests and didn't look back once. Lorraine stood there, shaken for the first time all night. Gregory placed a hand on her shoulder, but she pulled away, suddenly aware of how alone she was becoming. That's when I found my footing. I stepped up to the stage, not in anger, but in a calm that surprised me. You both need to leave, I said. My voice felt foreign in my own throat. Gregory, ever the PR man, opened his mouth to speak. Caleb, maybe we should. No, I cut him off. You need to go. Now. They left, her heels echoing across the marble floor, his head ducked low. I turned back to the room. I think the party's over, I said simply. And then, for the first time that night, I heard my own voice again. The house was too quiet when I got back. After all the voices, the stares, the unraveling at that party, it was the silence that finally broke me. I sat down on the edge of our bed and let my weight sink into the mattress like I hadn't done in weeks. Something about that act, the normalcy of it, pushed everything loose. I cried until my throat burnt, until my chest ached with the weight of it all. 10 years. A decade of building something I thought was unshakable. Gone in under 10 minutes. Her side of the closet was still full. Her perfume lingered on the pillows. But I already knew she wasn't coming back, not really. Not after what she did. Not after choosing spectacle over honesty. The next morning, I called a lawyer. It wasn't a decision made in anger. It was necessity. Something in me had snapped at that party, not from rage, but from truth. Lorraine had been retreating emotionally for months. She'd started coming home later. Less conversation, more distractions. I thought it was work stress. I thought maybe we just needed to reconnect. I never imagined the truth was standing behind her, smug and silent on a stage, waiting to be introduced. My attorney, Daniel, listened quietly as I told him the story. His only question after a long pause was, do you want to contest or dissolve? Dissolve, I said. Completely. I served her papers the following week. That's when the texts began. At first, they were brief. Almost casual. Lorraine, I didn't expect that reaction from my family. Lorraine, can we talk? Lorraine, I know the way I did it was wrong, but it was the only way I could say it all. Then the tone changed. As if she wasn't sure who she wanted to be anymore, the regretful partner, the scorned woman, the victim of circumstance. She tried each on like a coat. Lorraine, I was crying out for help and you never saw it. Lorraine, we could still go to therapy. Maybe figure out what comes next peacefully. Lorraine, if you had really been listening these last few years, this wouldn't have happened. I didn't respond to any of them. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I had already said too much for too many years. I had asked her to talk. I had asked her to open up. I had invited her into my thoughts, my fears, even my hopes for a family despite our struggles. And she gave her answer in front of 50 people. What could I say now that hadn't already been answered in full? I gave everything to Daniel. Every message. Every voicemail. Every attempt to spin the narrative in her favor. He filed for a clean dissolution. No spousal support. Split the assets as evenly as possible. I kept the house. She could take the car and whatever she wanted from the guest room. That was the room she started using months ago to get better sleep. Her lawyer responded 3 days later with a request for support. Not only did she want half of everything, she wanted monthly payments. Her claim? That she'd given up career opportunities to support mine. That I had coerced her into domestic life, despite her ambitions. It was almost laughable. She'd worked less by choice. Took up freelance design projects from home. I encouraged every endeavor. I supported her. Backed her. Bragged about her work. Even when she pivoted twice into new interests and left jobs to follow passion instead of paychecks, I covered for us both. Now that I wouldn't fund her anymore, I was suddenly the villain. Daniel asked, "Do you want to fight this in court?" "I want her to feel the truth," I said. "If that means court, so be it." So we prepared. Statements from friends. Screenshots of conversations. A notarized testimony from her father about what he witnessed that night. Everything documented, dated, organized. But then something changed. Her lawyer reached out before the first mediation. They wanted to talk privately. I agreed, but only through Daniel. The message came through clearly: she wanted to avoid court. The evidence was too strong. Her actions too blatant. And maybe Gregory wasn't standing beside her anymore because he wasn't mentioned again, not once. A week later, Lorraine dropped her claim for support. The final paperwork moved fast after that. No fights. No drama. Just signatures, confirmations, and silence. It was over. But I was only just beginning to process what had happened. After the paperwork was filed and the legal dust settled, I expected relief to flood in like a wave. Instead, there was only stillness. A quiet, unfamiliar stillness. No angry texts. No lawyers. No expectations. Just me, a house too big for one person, and a heart still recalibrating its rhythm. The first morning I woke up officially divorced, I stared at the ceiling for what felt like an hour. I wasn't thinking about Lorraine. I wasn't mourning the marriage. I was wondering how long I'd been silent, how many years I'd spent keeping my head down, navigating her moods, smoothing over friction, until I didn't even recognize my own reflection anymore. It started slow, this process of rebuilding. I rearranged furniture not just to change the space, but to reclaim it. I threw out the matching mugs we got for our 6th anniversary. Changed the passwords to our streaming accounts. Not out of spite. Just necessity. Like changing the locks after a stranger walks out with your trust in their hands. I began journaling every night. At first, it was just raw memories, arguments we never resolved, things I never said, warnings I ignored. But soon, something changed in those pages. The entries grew reflective, not reactive. Less about her, and more about me. About the boy I'd been when we met, hopeful, loyal to a fault, maybe a little naive. And the man I had become. Not hardened. Just clear. I saw now how subtle her erosion of me had been. The comments wrapped in humor that made me question myself. The times I'd walk on eggshells because a small disagreement could spiral into silence that lasted for days. The emotional withdrawal that followed any request I made if it didn't align with her plan. People saw Lorraine as assertive, ambitious, confident. I had too, at first. But confidence without compassion becomes something else. Something dangerous. I wasn't bitter, though. I just didn't want to carry lies anymore. Not hers. Not mine. One afternoon, I found a letter she'd written to me during our 2nd year of marriage. It had slipped behind the dresser and somehow escaped our many moves. Her handwriting, neat, all caps, spelled out promises she'd never keep. It wasn't the content that broke me. It was the realization that I had believed every word. That I had once clung to them like anchors. I burned it that evening in the backyard fire pit. It wasn't a ritual. It wasn't vengeance. It was release. The embers floated into the night, and I watched until they disappeared completely. I began volunteering at a local nonprofit that offered mentorship to young men navigating relationships, careers, and identity. I didn't start with my story. I just listened. But with time, I realized I had something to offer, something real. The guys would ask, "How do you know what to say?" and I'd smile and shrug. But the truth was, I knew what not to do. I knew what silence cost. Through that work, I met people who didn't know my past. Who didn't see me as the guy whose wife humiliated him. They saw a steady presence. A patient listener. And slowly, I started seeing that too. It was around this time I reconnected with an old friend, Nate, from college. We hadn't spoken in years, but he'd heard what happened through the grapevine and invited me out for a hike. I almost declined. I'd gotten so used to keeping to myself. But I said yes. That hike turned into a weekend trip. Then into regular calls. It reminded me that I had been loved before Lorraine. That there were people who knew who I was, and who missed him. I also started therapy. A friend recommended a counselor who specialized in post-divorce identity rebuilding. I didn't expect much. But it quickly became one of the most valuable hours of my week. In our first session, she asked, "When was the last time you made a decision entirely for yourself, without weighing someone else's reaction first?" I couldn't answer. That silence haunted me. So I made a promise, to make one decision every day for myself. Small ones at first. What to cook. What to wear. Whether or not to answer a text. Then bigger ones, where to travel. Who to see. What to let go of. One day, I walked into a bookstore and bought a novel, a piece of literary fiction, something I hadn't touched in years. That night, I read for hours. I'd forgotten the joy of losing myself in someone else's world. The way words could rebuild things inside you. In the weeks that followed, my house stopped feeling like hers. The spaces became mine. My mornings became lighter. Not perfect, but real. I stopped checking her social media. I stopped listening for her name. I stopped needing closure. Because I understood now that closure isn't something given. It's something chosen. I chose it every time I said no to bitterness. Every time I let go of a memory that no longer served me. Every time I looked in the mirror and saw a man I respected, not because he'd survived betrayal, but because he hadn't let it define him. Spring arrived without fanfare. One morning I stepped outside, and the air had changed. Warmer. Lighter. Like the world itself had exhaled. I was walking through town when I passed a coffee shop I hadn't noticed before. Tucked into a corner between a second-hand bookstore and a pottery co-op. The sign simply read, "June's." Something about it felt inviting, not loud, not trendy. Just present. I stepped inside. A woman behind the counter looked up and offered a smile that felt genuine. Not practiced. Not polite. Just real. She had dark hair pulled back into a bun and a small tattoo of a pine tree on her forearm. "What can I get started for you?" she asked. It had been so long since a stranger had spoken to me without expectation, I forgot how to respond for a moment. "Black coffee. Nothing fancy." She nodded and got to work. Her movements were unhurried, deliberate. Comfortable in her space. I took a seat by the window and watched people pass outside. A young couple with a stroller. A teenage girl in headphones. An older man walking his terrier. It hit me how long I had lived in this town without really being part of it. "Here you go," the woman said, placing the mug on the table. "Let me know if you want a refill." "Thanks. Do you own this place?" Guilty, she grinned. "I'm June." Of course she was. "Caleb," I said, standing to shake her hand. That was it. A brief interaction. But something in me shifted. Over the next few weeks, I kept going back. At first it was for the coffee. Then for the silence. Then because it felt like a place I belonged. June and I didn't talk much those first few visits. But eventually, we shared stories. I learned she'd left a corporate job to open the shop. That her father was a carpenter and taught her how to refinish furniture. That she was the kind of person who remembered names and orders, not because it was good business, but because she cared. I never told her my whole story. But I told her enough. She never asked for more. One afternoon, she sat across from me during a lull. "Do you ever wish you could go back?" she asked. "To before?" I thought about that for a moment. "No," I said. "But I wish I had listened to myself sooner." She nodded, understanding more than I said aloud. June didn't become my savior. She wasn't a cure. But she reminded me what it felt like to be seen. Without being edited. As our conversations deepened, I noticed things that had once been painful now felt different. I could talk about Lorraine without bitterness. I could look at photos from our early years and smile, not because I wanted to relive them, but because I no longer needed to erase them. Our marriage had shaped me. It had broken me. But it had also carved out a space that was now being filled by something better. Not just June. But me. My friends noticed the shift. Nate told me, "You're not just surviving anymore. You're living." He was right. I took trips alone. I cooked new recipes. I learned how to play the piano, something I'd always wanted to try but never made time for. My home felt different. Not because I had replaced the furniture or painted the walls, but because I had replaced the weight. The emotional cost of constantly accommodating someone else's volatility. One night, June invited me to a small dinner she hosted for a few friends. Nothing extravagant. Just candles, home-cooked food, quiet laughter. When someone asked how we met, I said, "She served me coffee when I needed stillness." Everyone chuckled. But I meant it. That evening, as we cleared the dishes, she looked at me and said, "You seem so different from the man who walked in here a few months ago." "I feel different," I admitted. "Like I'm finally living my own story." June reached for my hand. We didn't say anything else. We didn't need to. The pain that once defined me had become something else entirely. Perspective. Strength. A map drawn in scar tissue. A year had passed since the night my marriage publicly ended. 12 months of unlearning. Of shedding layers that had clung to me for too long. Of realizing that survival wasn't the goal, clarity was. I hadn't heard from Lorraine in nearly 6 months. The last message was a short, neutral text. "I hope you're doing well." I didn't reply. Not out of cruelty, but because there was nothing left to say. We had already said everything loudly, painfully, and in front of everyone. In some alternate world, I might have imagined an ending where she apologized fully. Where we met in a quiet cafe, and she owned her mistakes without excuse. But the world doesn't always offer that kind of closure. And sometimes, you don't need it. Peace isn't something you receive. It's something you choose. That became my truth. When people asked me what happened, I didn't hide it. I didn't dramatize it either. I simply said, "She made a choice. And I made mine." That was enough. What surprised me most was the way people responded. Some told me their own stories. Quiet betrayals. Emotional bruises. Years of erasing themselves in the name of keeping the peace. Men and women alike. I realized I wasn't alone. And neither were they. I started writing about it. Not for revenge or validation. But because stories matter. Not just the polished ones with happy endings, but the raw ones, the ones that say, you can lose everything and still become more. One of my essays was picked up by a local online magazine. Then a second. People started reaching out. Not just to say they understood, but to thank me for telling the truth without turning bitter. One message stood out. It was from a man in his 50s. He wrote, "I stayed 27 years in a marriage that hollowed me out. Reading your story made me finally file the papers. Thank you for reminding me I'm allowed to want peace." That message felt like justice. Not the kind you find in courtrooms. Not the kind stamped by a judge. But the kind you feel in your bones when the weight you carried helps someone else rise. That's the justice no one can take from you. And as for Lorraine? From what little I've heard, her relationship with Gregory ended not long after the party. She left the company soon after. Word spread about what she did. About how it all fell apart. Her family hasn't spoken to her since. I don't know where she lives now. Or what she does. I don't need to. She's not my story anymore. The man I was during those 10 years, he's gone too. Not buried, but honored. He tried. He loved. He endured more than he should have. But he laid the groundwork for who I am now. And now, I'm okay. More than okay. I don't live for forgiveness or second chances. I live for mornings that begin without dread. For friendships rooted in truth. For laughter that doesn't come with consequences. June is still part of my life. We're not rushing. We're not naming things too soon. We're just showing up for each other, one day at a time. And that feels right. One evening, she asked, "Do you ever wish things had gone differently?" I thought about that for a long moment. Then I said, "Not anymore. Because if they had, I might still be pretending." I paused. I'm not pretending anymore. That's the real ending. Not her apology. Not a new love. Not even forgiveness. Just this. I found myself. And he was worth the wait. Thank you for watching the video. Like it if you watched the video to the end and don't forget to subscribe. Have a nice day.